a great way to build that audience. And if you're starting a brand, share that story. Your story may be different, and you're going to really build that community that can relate to you and find themselves in the connective tissues.
No. Ooh, that's better, right, babe?
Yeah!
Yeah. She founded an architectural concrete company.
He founded a $100 million clothing company.
She took the world by storm as a social media star.
He took the world by storm as a famous serial entrepreneur.
Together we started a business.
And had babies.
Now we're figuring out the best ways to do both.
Join us as we learn from other entrepreneurs going through the same life struggles.
As they share their life hacks about success, love, kids.
And everything in between.
One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through. And it will be someone else's survival guide. Quote by Brene Brown. No matter what you do, your job is to tell your story. Quote by Gary Vaynerchuk.
Welcome to this episode of the Pretty and Punk Podcast. My name is Dan Caldwell. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm here with my absolutely beautiful wife and
Ildiko Ferenczi.
amazing person in the world.
I'm waiting for the list.
Most
Keep
of the time.
Going.
Amazing.
Keep
Sometimes you get on my nerves.
Thanks.
We have another great podcast. And this podcast today, we wanted to speak about, and actually I'll tell you where the idea came up from, because our son is speaking on stage this week.
He's doing another entrepreneurial stage. That's his audience. And it's a big one, another big one.
And what we were trying to tell him, going in there and preparing for this speech, is that he's telling, part of his story.
Yeah.
And how important it is to tell your story, how it can help other people when you tell your story, that connective tissue when you tell your story, and how it can help those people because they're going through some of the things that you're going through right now.
Mm-hmm. They really see themselves in your story, whatever that may be. Even if it's something that they haven't experienced, they can still feel different experiences through that vulnerability that you're sharing.
Hey guys, we hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Pretty and Punk Podcast. And if you are, and you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. It just takes a second. It means so much to us because it really helps the podcast get out there to more listeners like you guys. And if you know anybody it might help and you can send it to them, we really appreciate that too.
We also love and appreciate your reviews. Even the babies look forward to them every day. If you share this episode on social media today, don't forget to tag us. We want to celebrate you because we know it's not easy being a parent in business, and the way that you juggle things makes you a superhero. That's worth a shout out. Together, we have a community of our personal followers as well, and we just want to put it out there. We want to show everybody that this juggle is possible, and you are our family, and we're so proud and grateful to have you a part of this family. So don't forget, all the links are below in the show notes. And thank you again. And let's get back to the show.
I love the quote that Daniel actually gave at the beginning of this podcast from Brene Brown. One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be someone else's survival guide.
Yeah, I love that one.
I mean, I'm sure, I know story probably affected you in some ways. I know I'll just, my personal experience, reading the stories of Damon Johns and how he had started FUBU when he started FUBU, the clothing company.
You love that story. You just told that on the last podcast.
No, with the last podcast.
Yes,
it was, I really, when you are trying to build something, you have no idea where to go. And at that time, we didn't have a lot of information out there in the world. So I was reading this magazine and read his article about how when he, was trying to find out how to market his brand, he had a friend that knew LL Cool J, and LL Cool J was running to, trying to get out of town, and he had a flight, and he had just got to his house. He was jumping in the limo, and they threw a shirt on him real quick. And they caught this one shot. He said one shot, it could have been a horrible shot, but they caught this one shot as he's getting into the limo and he's got this FUBU shirt on. And that became an ad for his brand. And you don't realize the story behind that photo because it looks like, just an action shot of somebody getting into a limousine wearing the FUBU shirt. But you realize that there was a huge story about how he'd rushed over there to get this shirt on him, and then he didn't have time to really take the shot, so they just snapped the shot, and they happened to get a good one, and that became what built their brand. And I just remember reading that story and how it inspired me and how it inspired Charles to when we were building our brand. And I'm sure you had stories about that too. I know you'd always said that your mom had wanted to tell her story about how she had come to Canada and brought you guys here, trying to raise you in a better place.
Yeah.
And I know that inspired you because you've told me that story so many times, and just how that inspired you when you were building your company.
I think that story really helped build my social media following. And I feel that there are so many people that are, or whose parents, there's a lot of people that are our age that are immigrants, but mostly our parents and grandparents, and that has sewed me together to so many people all over the world that have very similar stories, that find themselves in that story, because it's a very powerful story to leave your family behind, leave everything behind and start fresh. I know when I first listened to Gary Vee, what connected me wasn't just his business stories, but the fact that his family they were immigrants, that they came to the country with nothing and they worked so hard. That was my family's story too. And that was all the followers that were the first, believe it or not, platform that I grew really big on was something called Periscope. Twitter was big, but I grew enormously on this broadcasting channel where you just talk. And I didn't know what to talk about, so I just started talking about sharing stories every single day about my family and myself. And it went to 200 and something million likes. And I became one of the most loved broadcasters very quickly, not because they liked me, but because they found themselves in my story. And I feel like that is such a great way for you to, if you want to be an influencer, a great way to build that audience. And if you're starting a brand, share that story. Your story may be different, and you're going to really build that community that can relate to you and find themselves in the connective tissues.
Yeah, I think that now building a brand has changed. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when you built a brand, it was about this name, and it really didn't have to have that. They would have stories, but not, it just, now you are your brand. Mm-hmm. The person behind the brand is the brand. You can think of, if you think of just about any brand that you buy from today, you probably know some sort of backstory about how that brand was built, and it may well be somebody's name actually on the brand that about that person. What it took to build that brand, how they started that brand, how that brand grew, just because of the story that they have told. And for entrepreneurs, it's so important because those stories inspire you. I can remember when my dad was in Vietnam, and when he went to Japan, and I remember being little, and I was just teaching Daniel a little bit of Japanese, just counting to 10. And I always remember that just because I remember being little, my dad teaching it to me.
Right.
And being inspired kind of by his stories in Japan and learning martial arts, practicing Japanese karate and him showing me his belts. And I remember wearing his belts around the house when I was little, just because what inspired me about wanting to train in martial arts.
That's awesome. I mean, I love that. I was just going to say how when people are sharing their stories, I feel our audiences are parents. So when I heard the story of Kendra Scott, how she started her business, she was carrying her baby and she was selling something totally different. She was just trying to help out the family, and now she has an entire line of jewelry, and she stumbled upon that in that experience. And I love her story. I love what she's done to the brand, and I love how she even has this university that teaches other women how to become entrepreneurs. And she just did a cross promotion with Love Shack Fancy. I love Love Shack Fancy because I find myself in my feminine right now, like many women are trying hopefully to get into their feminine if they can. But, and I'd like to be more in my feminine. But as for dressing in my feminine, I love that. And all of a sudden, the owner of Love Shack Fancy started being more, I guess, the face of the brand. I don't remember it being like that in the beginning, but now she's got such a strong presence and she's sharing on social media. I just really love brands like that, and especially the moms and the dads. And I love the story because we all have struggled. Let's not beat around the bush. We've all struggled as parents in one way or another, or we've seen our parents struggling financially. And I remember my mom pushing with the jewelry business. So it's like I found myself in hers. I don't really wear a lot of Kendra Scott. I have maybe a couple pieces, but I'll never forget her story, and I love what she's doing. And I watch her all the time. She's letting you know
that it's possible. The fact that she's raising kids, and it's the whole reason we have this podcast is that we're telling the story that this is possible. So people find the possibilities within us when they go, hey, these guys, they're taking their kids with them. They're homeschooling their kids. They're taking their kids everywhere they go with them to these business meetings. We're letting...
She was wearing her baby.
I'm sure people are doing some of that because they see us do it.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to convey in our story. So whether you tell that through a podcast or through Instagram or through your business page, whatever that is, they're connecting with an audience because they're telling their story.
It's such even Pink Lily, who we've had on a previous episode, she did the same thing. They were struggling, very much struggling. And now I think they just moved into the dream house of the century. They just built it. They have this multi-million-dollar brand of women's clothing. And her husband was saying, I never, ever thought that I would be involved in women's clothing. And there they were. There they are now. Sometimes God speaks through these women. So many women are sharing their stories where my husband was struggling and I just had this idea. And with his support, something blows up and it's theirs together. Even Jamie Carolina, I really hope I pronounced that right. But she had this idea and her family was just telling her, give up, give up, give up. But she knew that there was this white space in the industry where not everybody had the perfect. She was really struggling with rosacea. Not everybody had that perfect cover girl skin. And her husband said, okay, I believe in it. I believe in you. I believe in it. And they just pushed and pushed and pushed, and she's made it. She sold that company.
She got me. It's funny is I read her book. I don't normally read too many books written by women, on their businesses. Yeah. I read a lot of business books, but usually it's men.
There's a lot of billionaire women out there. Got to learn from them too.
But because of her story, obviously becoming a billionaire, and everybody aspires to have, that.
Well, it's interesting to know
company.
How.
But yeah,
did this happen?
Hearing her story, and that's exactly what she was going through. Exactly
something very relatable.
It lets you know, like, man, I don't have to be perfect to make it work. I don't have to be perfect for my company to succeed.
Exactly.
That things are going to be wrong, that wheels are going to fall off the truck, and I can still get through that and make it happen. And she has a very inspirational book, Believe.
Yes.
It's I haven't read her new book, but that book, at one point she's going on QVC and she's standing backstage, and she's I think it's the first time that she's going on QVC, and she's just scared out of her mind because she doesn't know what to do, and she's kind of improving, and it turns out to be this one of the biggest sales days that she's ever had or they've ever had.
Yeah.
And
but what did she do before that? She was in the car, and like everybody else, like my mom, like every entrepreneur that I look up to that was struggling, she was in the car praying to God.
And crying. And, I think every entrepreneur has had
answer.
that moment in the car where they're sitting in their car praying or crying or, just trying to find hope. And I think she really needed it at that moment, if I remember correctly. It's been a couple years since I read the book, but it's just telling that story through a book, through Instagram, even writing it down. Even if you're not an entrepreneur and you're listening to this, writing it down, writing your story down to pass that on to your family, that's your legacy. And I know, so here's one thing that I learned. So many people think that they don't have a story, that their life maybe isn't important enough to have that who would want to read my story. I feel like that sometimes. And, even reflecting on my story, I feel like who would want to hear this story, or who would want to hear what I've gone through. It's like, that's a feeling that's just common amongst people. And you have to know that there's always that your story can be interesting to anybody. Everybody has struggles.
Yeah.
And if you write down that story for future generations to live, or even now a video vlog, on YouTube, whatever that is that you can pass on. Imagine your family 2 generations from now watching you on YouTube, watching your story, or reading your book, or reading your memoirs. I mean, how inspiring can that be for them? What are the type of messages that you can pass down to them with the struggles that you were going through in your life?
Oh, I love that where you say the struggles. I love your story of Tap Out, but then I also love my story of building the concrete brand. But what's most powerful to me right now is overcoming this health journey. And I mean, of course, I'm still struggling time to time, but when doctors give you the worst advice and this is all going down, it's a big production in front of your children. And this could be incredibly traumatizing to children because we had to bring them in with us every time we'd go to the doctor. And they were my son, he really understood. He was young.
And he kind of he still cries today. It's like what was it? 2 weeks ago, he was asking you weren't feeling good. And he said,
that was it.
You're not gonna.
Yeah, no. But he just,
not really
he
sick,
worries.
Mommy.
I think it's because we lost grandma suddenly. And last night he was crying for grandma. But what I'm saying, I guess the whole point of this conversation is that I was the happiest when I was given the worst news because I had these 2 miracle babies. And this little boy would say the most remarkable, beautiful things to me. You can do it, Mommy. They're lying. Just the sweetest, most innocent things from a child. I'm telling you, it is stronger than the most powerful medicine in the world. And from that story that we went through, my son came up with his speech that he's now on stages in front of thousands of people, 3,000 to 4,000 people, telling the story of the power of words and prayer because he was there to witness what I went through. People are asking me to go on stage, but I say, my son tells his story so well, take him. I've had the spotlight how many times? Yes, Dan and I are going to do a speech together, but I want him to take that, just that ammo, that blessing, that thing within him and go inspire others, because I'm telling you, I could tell my story, but when Daniel tells his story, everybody cries. And I feel like that's going to hit someone's, God is speaking through him, and that's going to hit someone.
I mean, they're all,
everybody's
going to go through a health challenge at some point.
Any challenge. And it's not, for him, it was this health challenge and our family. And, sometimes we've had business issues that we've all had to work through. Financial issues we've all had to work through. We never keep secrets from the kids, because I feel like rather than woe is me, let's come up with some kind of solution. Let's think positive, even when it's really tough. Today, before the podcast, I didn't feel great. Nothing medical. I didn't get a lot of sleep, and I don't feel well, but you just have to push through that. And if you can share the story, whatever it is, health challenge, business challenge, if you can share that story, or even someone else's story, as Dan said, and this hurts, and it's hard to say, my mom's attorneys and doctors said, share, you have to write this book. You need to write your life story. You need to write your life story. She didn't get around to it because she passed suddenly. She was supposed to live till her hundreds. I swear she was going to outlive everybody.
All of us.
But sometimes something happens, and she didn't get to finish that book. So you'll find me talking about my mother a lot on this podcast. One, because I'm finishing her book, and if I put that out there, my kids can listen to it later about all the great, phenomenal things that she did. Two, it'll remind you guys to hug and love your mom, and just spend time with her, ask her questions that you need to know, because life is very precious and you just never know what can happen. And may it inspire you to share your story, write it down somewhere, share it on social media. It could turn into something else. For example, my son, he says, I don't want to do selfish things. I don't want to really act anymore. I want to share this story, and I want to change the world. That may change when he's older.
When he was writing a speech, we went to him and, we wanted to help him obviously write a speech, and I wanted to. So I asked him, what are two things in your life where something has hurt you, or you felt defeated a little bit, but then you overcame it? And we talked through it a little bit, and one of the things he came up with is that how people were talking to him on the podcast, and how people would say mean comments inside of our podcast or our Instagram posts about Daniel being too young to, like, we were forcing him to be on the podcast or something when he wanted to be on the podcast. And so he said, I want to talk about that. And that was one of the points. Yeah, because
that's something that's very visceral to him. He understands what that's like.
Yeah, he felt like it was an attack on him a little bit.
I remember this one time we were going to go, he asked if I could talk to someone to put him on a stage. And I said, no, I'm not going to ask. You do it. You do the pitch. So they invited him to come. It sounded like he was going to come speak, but I think they invited him as a guest, and it was also like $3,000 a ticket or something.
Yeah.
I was like, are you serious? He just wants to go and change the world. But he felt broken, like sad. He's like, do they think that I'm too young, that I can't do this? And I said, maybe that's not your audience. And then I heard later that the entire speaking conference, everybody was throwing F-bombs and God didn't want that to happen, because his little ears didn't need to be exposed to that. Very incredible business people, but it was not, what is it? PG. It was definitely not. Rated. Yeah, it was very
not for him. That's
very passionate.
Okay, so, but where a door is closed, another door is open, and that's why he's speaking this week.
It just started happening. And I told him, I said, do not get upset. Do not feel that your heart is broken because of this. Because That's exactly it. God will close the doors because that wasn't meant for you. There was a lot of language I heard later that you didn't need to hear. And then another door will open. And that's exactly what's happening. And this momentum. And this is another part of his story when he grows up.
And I think, and the other problem he had,
yes.
the other thing that he wanted to speak about was you being sick in the hospital. And he starts off, when my mom was really, really sick in the hospital,
Yeah.
I prayed and spoke powerful words over her life. And I just love that part in his speech that really connects with what he was going through, because people have had, other people, adults that are listening to him speak, and you can see them get emotional, and it's like they have gone through those things.
100%.
Maybe their family or their kid or their parents, went through something, and maybe they're connecting with that. And I just always remember that. And speaking about,
or in the future, it gives you that ammo. I've been to several conferences where they kind of give you the blueprint, or they give you the blueprint on what you need to do, the steps that you need to do, the tactical steps. And when it feels so hard, you want to be able to do something. But what do? You give it to God. And that's what he's saying. This is one of the most valuable tools that you could do, because when 2 or more people come into agreement together in front of God, it shall be.
By the way, who is probably the best storyteller of all time? God is, the Bible has been read by more people in the world than any other book in history.
It's the best self-help book.
It is, truly. Mm-hmm. And it's because he's telling his story, telling the story of the history of the earth. It's a testament to God and to why we are here. Mm-hmm. And it's powerful.
Yeah.
And it's powerful to everybody who reads it. And I think that it's just a great testament to why story is so powerful.
Right. I mean, in that Bible, it reminds us that God knew us before we were formed in the womb. And your personal story is a testament to his divine plan for your life. And everybody has a different story. And just, come out from the shadows and share that story, because it is so, you don't know who you're going to touch, and it can spiral into something else.
Everybody needs to know how to tell their story. If you haven't told your story in some form or fashion, you need to start now. Mm-hmm. You need to start now before it's too late, because like Ildiko's mom, who wasn't able to tell her whole story, who probably has she's a person who's seemingly a normal, regular person, but who went through all of these things, starting, having separated from her husband, and then having to pull herself up, pull her bootstraps up and start this antique store, and then a jewelry store, and then your store. And then buy all this real estate. I mean, who would? It's like
insane.
You're not famous until you're famous. Like if that book came out, like somebody would read that story and get 100%. So much from it. Like, how do I have nothing? How am I going to figure this stuff out in my life?
I'll never forget.
And she did.
Yeah, in the jewelry store, and I know a lot of people can probably relate to this if their parents had, wonderful friends. She was friends with the mayor, attorneys, doctors, and we had a very high clientele list, especially in the antique store, selling high-end antiques, and in the jewelry store. Antique store, that was a miracle in itself. She didn't know what she was going to do. She only had the antiques from her home, her wedding ring, her personal jewelry, and somehow, because she told such a powerful story and she was so vulnerable and shared herself with others, word went around town, and these attorneys, and they would bring beautiful pieces of antique, and then we would get a percentage of that because it was consignment. And then word would get around even more, and then the doctors would come in with these beautiful pieces, and then it evolved into the jewelry, because she always wanted to have a jewelry store. And again, I just remember all this. When she shared her story, they would share stories because they found themselves within her story. And this was before social media. And she had such a powerful clientele, it's just, I can't even believe that it happened that way before there was a type of social media that there is now. But it's word of mouth.
Yeah.
Because of the story.
Yeah, I think as my one regret, I wish there would have been more social media while Charles was still alive, that we could have, I think we would have taken advantage of it more and been able to hear more of his story and our story and why we were building the brand, and hopefully it would have inspired more people. Luckily, we had a TV show, and there's so many great parts in that TV show for the people who saw it, who were very inspirational. People always tell us, how inspirational that show was for them.
Yeah.
And there's so many opportunities now to share your story, however that might be, whether that be through social media or a podcast or writing a book or just memoirs, writing your story down. And if you don't think you have a story, I promise you, I used to say, I was, being a former police officer, every police officer in the world has a story.
Yeah.
Because on a daily basis, you're going out into the world and facing danger, and you're running into the face of danger when everybody else is running the other direction.
Yeah.
But yet, if you talk to a police officer and you ask them, hey, do you have any good stories? They'll probably say, not really. Most of them don't. They feel like they don't have any great stories in them.
Yeah.
But I've been on patrol with those guys, and every single one of them have a great story in their books and could write a whole book. And so you just have to,
even attorney,
anybody.
Well,
I mean,
you can't really
if
share
you've
those
raised
stories.
a family, things have happened in your life. If you've built a business, things have happened in your life.
Why do most moms go viral? Because they share that personal birth story too. And then
all
of a sudden
moms are going viral right now
community-
who are out there putting themselves out there
they're
because
sharing the hard-
other mothers are connecting with them and their stories.
That's the
and they're
biggest
just, I mean, I don't
community.
want to say regular moms. They're just normal moms raising kids but going through stuff.
Has said, it's just a mom. And I feel so sad because a lot of people have. I remember when I had the concrete company, and I'd say I have an architectural concrete company, and we'd be at events, and I remember that some of the wives would come and they'd say, I'm just a mom. What do you mean you're just a mom? You're literally raising the next generation. What you do from the minute they take their first breath to when you send them off into the world, you're teaching them their mindset and everything that will either lead them to success or failure. So it is the most important job. I don't care what anybody says. If it could be a very impressive job. That is the most important job. If you're sitting around drinking, smoking, I'm not trying to judge, but there is a responsibility. I'm going to tell you, there is a responsibility. You have to be a good example. You have to put those things down. You have to come to God, have a conversation with God and say, hey, am I doing this right? And most moms nowadays are, but they're also struggling because it is a hard job. So stop that silly, I'm just a mom. That is the most important job. And if you listen to the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, their thank you speech is usually the mom. Sorry, but it's true.
So let's leave everybody with a challenge, guys. Guys, this is your challenge. We're challenging you and challenging ourselves too.
Yes.
To everybody to get better at storytelling and telling your story of your struggle and how you've created wherever you are in your life. Mm-hmm. And whether that's just passing this on to your family members, writing a diary or a memoir.
And the inventory, not just all the struggle, but what happened after that. How did you make it tactical? Make it a guide. Make it a manual. Not just the struggle.
Give the tips.
What
How
were the
did you fix it? How did you get out of that situation?
Everybody started something. My mom was very creative. When I started my business, I was very creative. I did a lot of things that I've never heard of before. She did a lot of things I've never heard of before. You've done a lot of things I've never heard of before. These are survival manuals. And when you write them down, and it doesn't have to be, just start with a one-page story. You could do point form or however, or just let the pen flow if you want. But just write some key things down that you want people to know about yourself.
And it's therapeutic too. It honestly helps your soul. Yeah. And I'll just leave you with a quick story real quick. When I was driving to Orange County one day back early on in the company's, mid-time in the company's history, when we were building Tap Out, another female that I had read her book, Martha Stewart. I was listening to her book on an audio. And I always tell everybody when I tell this story, don't let anybody know I was listening to Martha Stewart. But it was just there wasn't a lot of business books out at that time, and so I was listening to Martha Stewart's book, and she came to a part in the book where she said, "I started my magazine so that I could market my company." And I'd never thought of that for any reason. She said, I didn't make any money on my magazine, but I had started my magazine just purely to promote my company. It wasn't about making money on the magazine. It was about promoting the company. And I'd never thought of that before. And so I paused the book. I picked up the phone, and I knew somebody who had a magazine. It was called Bodyguard Magazine at the time. And I said, you have all this MMA content. I called the guy, and I happened to know the owner. I'd met him a while back. And he had this MMA magazine called Bodyguard Magazine. I thought that made no sense to me. So I called him up right there on the spot from my car and said, guys, you have this magazine called Bodyguard Magazine. It has nothing to do with MMA. What if we change the name to Tap Out Magazine? And I gave him a few ideas and a few, what we would want out of the deal. And it wasn't about money. It wasn't about making any money. It was just about some marketing pages, some publicity pages, and be able to promote some of our fighters in there and having Tap Out on the front of the magazine because they were all already being carried in Barnes & Nobles. And just that one simple idea, 2 months later, we had a Tap Out magazine on the shelves in Barnes & Nobles because they changed the name of the magazine. Just from that one idea, from being inspired by somebody else's story. And I'll probably never speak to Martha Stewart or be able to tell her what she did for me. But that one little thing changed a trajectory in our company, gave us that other little piece that gave us a heads up over some of the other brands that were out there. And so you never know how you are going to affect somebody who's reading your story or when you're telling your story, that person in the audience when you're standing on that stage. So don't discount what you are providing out there in the world when you tell that story. Let them be the judge of that. Yes. Let them, because it won't affect everybody, and not everybody out there. That story isn't for everybody out there. No. But if it touches that one person who touches a million, I'll just take a quote from my partner, Charles, my former partner, rest in peace, Charles. That if you touch that one person that can touch a million, then everything has been worth it. Mm-hmm. So we challenge you guys to tell your story in some way, whether that be through social media or through writing it down. And we hope to hear back from you guys, how you guys did that. If you guys can leave that in the comments or message us, we'd love to hear how you guys shared your story because it's so important for building your brand.
I love hearing everybody's stories.
Passing on that information to help other people out there in the world. Don't discount what that can do for other people.
Yes.
So thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Pretty and Punk Podcast. We hope that helped you today. And if it did, and if you know anybody who can use this information, who is going through something like this right now, or has a great story and hasn't shared it yet, send them this podcast and help them realize what a great story they have within their soul and how it can help other people.
Yeah, share it with your loved ones and friends. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps us grow. We're not asking for anything, just to connect with the people that need to hear the message we're talking about today. God bless you guys, and it was so great to talk to you guys.
We'll see you guys next week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pretty and Punk podcast. If you want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. God bless. See you next week.
Thank you for listening. I hope that changed your life. God bless. See you next time.